Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Research Podcast.
It is absolutely great to be here, and today we are diving deep into a dangerous and rapidly accelerating geopolitical storm.
That's putting it lightly.
I mean, it's a confluence of events that honestly feel like they were pulled straight from a Tom Clancy novel, but they're absolutely real and happening right now on, three separate continents?
Absolutely. And this isn't just one story. This is a massive deep dive connecting the dots between two seemingly separate but fundamentally connected global crises.
Right.
We're looking at unprecedented military and economic aggression at sea, this whole new era of maritime warfare.
And at the same time,
We have this accelerating internal crisis inside a major regional power, Iran, which is, it's teetering on the edge of revolution.
That's right. Our mission today is to synthesize these events for you because they are not isolated incidents. Not at all. We're looking at the dramatic and highly tense seizure of Russian oil tankers in the open ocean. We're analyzing Donald Trump's colossal, near unthinkable proposal to drastically increase the U.S. defense budget to $1.5 trillion.
1.5 trillion. It's just an insane number.
And crucially, we're unpacking the explosive, economically driven protests happening inside Iran.
Yeah.
So the core question, which is bubbling up across all our sources.
Yeah, from the New York Times to foreign policy.
It's stark. Are these indicators of an accelerating slide toward a genuine global conflict, perhaps even a potential world war?
That is the ultimate frightening question. And to tackle it, we're relying on some heavy-hitting sources today, reports from the New York Times, the BBC, the Financial Times, Fox News, and foreign policy.
Pretty broad spectrum.
A very broad spectrum. We've got a lot of complex ground to cover, especially the mechanics of, sanctions, evasion, and economic collapse. So let's start where the action began on the high seas.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately, because the whole story kicks off not with a conventional military attack, but with a strategic economic countermove by Russia back in 2023.
Exactly. When the sweeping Western sanctions and oil price caps hit, Russia's direct response was the creation of what the sources are universally calling a massive shadow fleet.
A shadow fleet.
What's fascinating here isn't just the existence of the fleet, but the sheer sophistication of the sanctions evasion system they built around it.
So it's more than just ships.
Oh, way more. When Western powers apply sanctions, they restrict three things essential for maritime commerce: insurance, financing the transactions, and port access.
Right, the basics.
Russia's workaround was to assemble this immense fleet consisting of well over 250 older, cheaper ships. They purchase these aging, often unreliable vessels, specifically because they know they have to operate entirely outside of the accepted legal and insurance frameworks that protect standard shipping.
So they're literally choosing vessels that are cheap enough to be disposable.
That's the idea.
Because they know they won't have standard, Western-backed maritime insurance. They're operating in a legal no man's land.
Precisely.
Yeah.
To be specific, standard commercial shipping insurance is provided by what are called P&I clubs protection and indemnity clubs, most of which are based in London.
Okay.
Without P&I coverage, you can't dock at major global ports and you can't get financing. The shadow fleet operates without this insurance, effectively creating a parallel high-risk economy where only other sanctioned nations or willing participants dare to interact.
And the goal, obviously, is to transport Russian oil outside the framework of those Western price caps and sanctions.
Right.
But, this tactic, as you mentioned, wasn't unique to Russia. It was previously perfected, sadly, by sanctioned regimes like Iran and Venezuela over many years.
They handed Russia the playbook.
They really did. They showed them how to go dark.
Exactly. It's a tried and true method for sanctioned nations, creating this parallel, unregulated shipping economy. But the U.S. began focusing its attention on specific vessels within this shadow network that connected sanctioned states.
Ah, okay.
And the focus landed squarely on one ship that became notorious, the Bella One, which was later renamed the Marinera.
Here's where it gets really interesting and starts linking our storylines together. This tanker was already notorious because of its travel history.
It had a record.
A long one. The Bella One frequently traveled between Venezuela and Iran, and the U.S. was specifically tracking it. The sources suggest the U.S. viewed its ties to Iran as particularly significant.
Like a key node.
Yeah, a key active node connecting this axis of sanctions resistance between Russia, Iran, and Venezuela.
Let's look closely at a bizarre incident from early 2024 involving the Bella One.
Mm-hmm.
The ship went to Iran, loaded up a full cargo of Iranian oil,
Okay.
and immediately disappeared after leaving the Strait of Hormuz.
And just for clarity for everyone listening, when a ship disappears in this context, it's not some mystery.
No, not at all.
That means they intentionally turn off the mandatory tracking and signaling systems, the automated identification system, or AIS transponders.
Right. The things that allow global maritime traffic to monitor its location and, crucially, its cargo origin and destination, it just goes dark.
Completely off the grid.
It went completely dark. The surprising and alarming thing is that the ship reappeared 2 months later on radar system.
A month.
2 months. And the U.S. Navy, which was tracking the whole time, found that it was empty.
Wow.
The implication here is massive.
Huh.
It had maintained stealth, completed a transoceanic journey, dropped its cargo somewhere, possibly Venezuela, though some sources suggest a deep-sea ship-to-ship transfer in international waters, and then just turned its transponders back on.
So that single voyage proved the whole concept.
It showcased the Shadow Fleet's complete operational capability to move high-value cargo undetected for extremely long periods. I mean, it essentially undermined the core mission of the entire sanctions regime.
That is a serious operational capability, and I imagine that would have been infuriating for the U.S. Treasury and the Navy.
Absolutely.
So the pursuit only intensified from there. The U.S. Coast Guard started tracking this vessel closely, noting another layer of camouflage.
Another trick.
While the ship was allegedly running Venezuelan oil, it was flying the flag of Guyana, a new and rapidly growing non-sanctioned oil player in the region.
So using that flag as another form of deception.
Right, to confuse trackers and port authorities who might otherwise flag it for illegal activity.
It's pure geopolitical camouflage. Then came the direct confrontation that really escalated the situation. In December, the ship attempted to enter Venezuelan waters, deliberately defying a formal ban issued by the U.S. government against oil containers entering Venezuelan ports.
So this was a direct challenge, a clear, active act of defiance against U.S. policy.
A very bold move.
But the captain backed down. The sources noted that upon detecting U.S. military movement, the Coast Guard was heavily involved here, the captain turned back immediately. He knew the risk had suddenly become kinetic.
That's a crucial detail. It signaled that while they could evade sanctions, they wouldn't risk open confrontation.
Not yet. But still, chasing an oil tanker in the open ocean is extremely difficult, right? Even for the U.S. military.
Incredibly hard. They are massive, slow-moving vessels. Yet, the Coast Guard, not Special Forces initially, but the Coast Guard chased this one ship for over a month.
One ship for a month.
They were determined to seize it. This wasn't just about the oil anymore. This was about setting a global precedent that the Shadow Fleet was vulnerable.
And the chase led them far from the Caribbean. The U.S. realized they needed help to finally corner it after the Bella One had sailed into the vastness of the North Atlantic.
It was a global chase.
So the U.S. enlisted help from the U.K.
Britain played a critical reconnaissance and intelligence role. While reports are conflicting, some suggest standard surveillance aircraft, others suggest the use of an Osprey aircraft.
With its unique tilt-rotor capabilities for high-speed tracking.
Exactly. The fact remains that the UK was instrumental in locating the vessel and keeping constant eyes on it.
And where was it finally found? Not near Venezuela, not near Iran.
But way up in the frigid North Atlantic, near Iceland and Ireland.
Wow, that just confirms the incredible length and complexity of this cat-and-mouse game. The tanker was clearly seeking refuge far from its normal routes.
And this brings us to the moment of seizure, which was the true geopolitical shockwave. Because when the U.S. forces finally arrived to take the ship, they discovered yet another layer of identity theft.
What now?
The ship had been hastily repainted with the Russian flag, and its name changed again, this time to the Russian-sounding Marinera.
Wait, I have to challenge this. Seizing a Russian-flagged ship, or any ship flying a state flag, is typically considered an act of war.
It is.
Or at the very least, an extreme provocation that violates international maritime law regarding sovereign property. How did the U.S. justify crossing that red line?
That is the core legal controversy.
Yeah.
The justification was purely economic and related to the non-compliance with sanctions and the lack of that accepted P&I insurance we talked about.
Ah, the insurance loophole.
Because the ship was operating outside all legitimate frameworks, the U.S. treated it as an unlicensed smuggling operation, regardless of the flag.
So they just ignored the flag?
They did. And this is unprecedented, even during maximum tension with Russia and China. It's an act that fundamentally redefines acceptable maritime enforcement doctrine.
The Russian reaction must have been apocalyptic, far beyond just diplomatic protests.
It was. According to the Wall Street Journal reporting cited in our sources, the Russians didn't just issue a diplomatic protest. The situation was so tense that they actually deployed a submarine to attempt a rescue mission.
A submarine.
A submarine. to rescue an oil tanker before the U.S. could fully seize the ship and its crew.
That's incredible.
That confirms two things. One, the ship was indeed a high-value Russian asset linked to the Shadow Fleet. And two, the level of direct, potentially kinetic conflict was extraordinarily high. We were moments away from a potential military confrontation near Iceland.
But ultimately, the U.S. prevailed. Donald Trump, or the DoD, acting under his orders, ordered the seizure to proceed.
They went for it. U.S. forces, including special units, descended onto the vessel via helicopters, a tactic learned, ironically, from Iran's past ship seizures in the Persian Gulf.
So they used Iran's own playbook against their allies.
Pretty much. They detained the crew, seized the ship, and also managed to seize a second vessel, the Sophia, during the same operation. This established a new, highly aggressive doctrine. The U.S. will hunt down the Shadow Fleet regardless of the flag it flies.
So we've established that the seizure of a Russian-flagged vessel connecting the sanctioned axis is a major, unprecedented escalation.
A huge one.
But what happened next, involving Venezuela, is almost more shocking. The speed and the silence with which Venezuela seems to have flipped sides in this global alignment.
It's stunning.
You go from being a Russian, Chinese, Iranian foothold to essentially an American client state overnight.
This raises an important question for international observers and for you, the listener. How did the U.S. manage to completely change Venezuela's geopolitical alignment without firing a single shot or missile?
Yeah, how?
Because it wasn't a military invasion. It was a rapid, non-military capitulation driven entirely by intense economic and political pressure, arguably leveraging the threat demonstrated by the seizure of the Marinera.
I mean, we're talking about a massive shift. Public reports, notably featuring Marco Rubio and statements from the Trump administration, claim that Venezuela is now committed to buying all its goods from the U.S.
All of them.
Everything from food to machinery. And they'll expel all Russian, Chinese, and Iranian military advisors and diplomats from its soil.
Now, that term, all goods, probably needs some careful unpacking here. The sources suggest this is likely a diplomatic exaggeration.
Sure.
But the reality is that they committed to shifting the overwhelming majority of their critical imports back to the U.S. sphere. That's not just a policy change. That's a regime change in function, if not in name. It forces the Maduro regime to break ties with its anti-American partners.
And our sources described how this was achieved. Not a military victory, but a special operation involving FBI elements,
Right.
potentially setting the stage for the personal kidnapping or removal of President Nicolas Maduro, signaling to him that the consequences for noncompliance were extreme, immediate, and personal.
That's the implication, that the U.S. had assets on the ground capable of enacting immediate personal regime change.
And that kind of political pressure, driven by the personal threat to the leadership, was key.
Clearly, Maduro believed his survival or his continued reign depended on this rapid pivot. And the key element to cementing the deal was, predictably, oil. It's the only thing Venezuela has left to trade.
So what was the deal?
Venezuela agreed to sell between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil, that's roughly 2 months' production for them, directly to the U.S.
That quantity is conservatively valued at around $3 billion on the open market. But here's the critical detail, as reported by the Financial Times, that defines this transaction.
This is the real catch.
The U.S. will not pay cash up front. The U.S. will sell this oil externally, and the proceeds will be deposited directly into U.S.-controlled banks.
Right.
And the sources explicitly raise the question of whether Venezuela will ever receive the full amount of that revenue, or if it will be used to pay off older debts or just maintain compliance.
So if you look at it through the economic lens, as you suggested earlier, it's absolutely not a normal sale.
No, it's a massive protection payment.
Exactly. Venezuela essentially paid the U.S. $3 billion worth of oil value to prevent the country from descending into total chaos, open warfare, or the removal of its leader. They purchased domestic stability and regime survival from the very power that was threatening them.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the geopolitical implications are stunning and immediate. Venezuela becomes essentially a U.S. colony overnight,
Gone.
removing a key Russian, Chinese, and Iranian foothold in the Western Hemisphere. It's a complete shift in the global balance of power, achieved by removing a massive strategic piece from the sanctions evasion axis simply through political pressure and economic leverage.
And it's important to remember that this operation was silent. It was conducted with surgical precision, demonstrating a capability to achieve regime alignment without a messy military intervention.
And for you, the learner listening right now, this operation sets a terrifying precedent. If the U.S. can flip a heavily entrenched nation like Venezuela this easily,
Hmm.
effectively trading political pressure and asset seizure for a massive geopolitical shift, which other allied or neutral nations that rely on specific leaders or economic channels could be next, it introduces extreme volatility into global power dynamics.
It really does.
This successful, aggressive foreign policy, the ability to seize a Russian ship near Iceland and destabilize a major adversary in the Western Hemisphere, it aligns perfectly with a massive proposed military buildup that is currently on the table in the U.S.
The heavy stick approach requires a really, really heavy stick.
You said it.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale and the speed of the proposed increase. Donald Trump is reportedly pushing to raise the U.S. defense budget to $1.5 trillion by 2027.
That is truly an astronomical figure.
It's hard to even comprehend.
The current budget sits at around $1 trillion. So we're talking about a $500 to $600 billion increase, depending on how you factor in baseline spending.
Which is more than the entire defense budgets of China, Russia, the UK, France, and Germany combined.
Combined.
This isn't just about maintaining the current posture. This is about achieving global military dominance in every theater simultaneously. It's a structural realignment of U.S. priorities towards pure, unadulterated global military capability.
And he's labeled this proposed force the Dream Army.
The Dream Army. And the spending is clearly earmarked for specific next-generation capabilities. The sources suggest this money isn't just for troop salaries, it's going into strategic areas like the mass production of hypersonic weapons.
Okay, that makes sense.
A significant expansion of the global drone fleet, the modernization and expansion of the nuclear triad, and crucially, building out Arctic warfare capabilities to counter Russia and China in that new strategic theater.
That immediately addresses the current geopolitical gaps. Hypersonic weapons bypass current defenses. The drone fleet allows for, pervasive high-volume surveillance and kinetic action without risking pilots.
And the Arctic buildup responds directly to melting ice caps, opening new strategic threats.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And interestingly, he's not shy about publicly criticizing the existing defense industry that is supposed to build this dream army.
Right. I saw this.
Our sources note that Trump publicly criticized defense giant Raytheon, for example, for not moving fast enough.
He called them out, saying they needed to immediately develop new factories, acquire massive amounts of land, and overhaul their production methods. Or they risked losing lucrative government contracts.
He suggested the company was becoming outdated and needed a total overhaul to meet the demands of a wartime economy, essentially.
A wartime footing.
This demonstrates Trump's core, deeply held belief. The military is the primary, if not the only, effective tool of U.S. foreign policy. And it needs to be massively resourced, modernized, and ready to act as an instantaneous tool for global coercion.
We saw this stick used in the seizure of the tankers, the blockade of Venezuela, and the past threats leveled against Iran.
For this administration, foreign policy is military capability backed by unchallengeable resources.
And this military focus isn't just limited to traditional theaters of conflict like the Middle East or Eastern Europe. It also applies to strategic, non-traditional theaters.
Specifically the Arctic.
Right, exemplified by Greenland.
Absolutely. The sources confirm that Trump requested an updated plan for the acquisition of Greenland, reviving an idea he had previously floated during his first term.
Which everyone thought was a joke at the time.
And crucially, the White House confirmed that the military option for acquiring this territory, meaning seizing it without Denmark's consent, remains under consideration.
That sounds insane on the surface, but strategically, Greenland is essential, right?
It's a massive strategic asset.
It sits on critical Arctic shipping lanes, provides a massive platform for intelligence gathering on Russia, and potentially holds vast, untapped mineral resources.
Exactly. It's a strategic choke point.
Right.
But Denmark's response is highly significant because it immediately highlights the danger of this aggressive unilateralism.
They're not having it.
Denmark is refusing both a sale and threatening severe political repercussions if the U.S. proceeds with any forceful acquisition.
And the specific threat is astonishing. Denmark is threatening to withdraw from NATO entirely if the U.S. proceeds.
That is the nuclear option of diplomacy. If Denmark leaves, the collective security commitment of NATO, Article 5, is fundamentally undermined.
It could start a domino effect.
It could very well lead to the end of NATO itself, as other European nations question the U.S. commitment to alliances versus unilateral expansionism. The U.S. would effectively destroy its own alliance structure just to gain a strategic landmass.
So let's put the pieces together. The analysis suggests that all these elements, the unprecedented seizure of Russian ships, the massive proposed budget, the aggressive pursuit of Greenland, the destabilization of Venezuela, it all points towards serious, active preparations for a global conflict.
It paints a terrifying and undeniable picture. On one hand, the old global order is clearly collapsing, evidenced by the U.S. engaging in non-traditional acts like seizing internationally flagged vessels and effectively forcing regime alignment in Venezuela.
And simultaneously, there are accelerating external threats that require this dream army.
Right. U.S. intelligence suggests a looming Chinese invasion of Taiwan is highly probable, putting the U.S. in a kinetic confrontation with China.
Which would be a massive war.
And in Europe, the situation is dire. The European Union is now discussing sending ground troops to Ukraine due to accelerating Russian territorial gains. The environment is becoming so volatile that major powers are preparing not just for regional skirmishes, but for the activation of all-out global warfare scenarios.
The pieces for World War III are truly falling into place.
They are.
The external pressure is rising. But let's look at the internal vulnerability of one of America's key adversaries in this geopolitical shift. We need to pivot sharply now to Iran, where internal pressures are reaching a critical point, potentially accelerating this entire global instability we've been discussing. We need to ask, why are these current protests different, fundamentally different from previous massive uprisings, like the 2022 Masa Amini movement?
This is the crux of the detailed analysis published in Foreign Policy. Previously, protests were generally led by educated urban youth, seeking more personal freedoms, social reform, challenging the mandatory religious dress code.
Right.
This time, the driving force is something far more destabilizing and universal across the entire country. The catastrophic economic collapse that is directly affecting the merchant class and the working middle class.
So it's not about ideology or social freedom this time. It's about survival.
It's about feeding your family.
That changes the stakes entirely.
It shifts the locus of power away from the universities and into the bazaars. That economic engine is grinding to a halt because the U.S. sanctions, coupled with the regime's mismanagement, have hollowed out the civilian industrial sector. The country relies heavily on imports for basic needs, and the currency crash has made those imports prohibitively expensive.
Let's break down the mechanics of the currency crash because the numbers are shocking.
They are. The currency has crashed dramatically. One U.S. dollar now equals 1,400,000 Iranian rials.
1.4 million.
So if you are an importer, a merchant, or a small business owner, the backbone of the Iranian economy, you rely on foreign currency to buy goods. When the value of your currency plummets like that, your entire inventory costs, well, it's an impossible number.
Your business is wiped out overnight.
Merchants who rely on stable imports and exports are facing total ruin and immediate bankruptcy, which has effectively halted all commerce. They cannot sell products they can't afford to replace.
And when the powerful traditional traders, the bazaarists, stop trading, the country stops functioning, the regime's traditional base of support starts eroding.
Exactly. The collapse of the real is a direct threat to the financial survival of the middle class, not just a lifestyle issue. And compounding this economic despair are severe environmental factors.
It's not just the economy.
No. A 5-year, persistent, catastrophic drought, severe environmental pollution, and relentless political repression. Analysts suggest that this combination creates a perfect recipe for revolution.
Economic collapse hitting the historically stable middle class, combined with environmental pressures.
It's a perfect storm.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that the middle class, the traders, the backbone of the historical Iranian Revolution itself, are the ones leading this, not just the elite or the university students.
And their geographical spread is unprecedented.
How so?
That's the other critical differentiator that signals this crisis is deeper than ever before. Previous revolts were contained mostly to Tehran and other major metropolitan areas.
Right, the big cities.
The current wave of protests, however, has spread to 270 areas across 27 of Iran's 31 provinces.
That's almost the entire country.
This widespread nature indicates that the economic despair is shared nationally, acting like a gasoline trail connecting the entire country, making it much harder for the security forces to contain.
Furthermore, the sources point out that the elite who previously led those earlier, more politically focused protests are now joining the middle-class movement.
So the movement is consolidating across demographics.
Exactly. It's gaining mass and seriousness, bringing both financial power and organizational skill.
And the movement is gaining traction even in smaller, previously untouched cities. Alarmingly, there are reports cited in Foreign Policy that protesters have taken control of at least 2 towns in western Iran,
Taken control.
forcing the security forces to retreat. That signifies a severe breakdown of centralized state control, far beyond mere street demonstrations.
And the volatility is rising because armed groups are now aligning with the protesters.
That's a crucial, notable difference from previous uprisings.
It signifies greater organization, the means to defend themselves from the security forces, and thus greater volatility that could easily spin into civil war.
And we cannot overlook the symbolism of defiance, which shows the depth of public anger. Protesters are actively destroying public symbols of the regime, such as the statue of Qasem Soleimani.
The regime's most venerated military figure.
The fact that the regime is unable to fully quash these acts of public disrespect, particularly against a figure so central to the IRGC's identity, is a profound sign of deep internal weakness and crumbling authority. The Revolutionary Guard's moral authority is weakening.
So the internal situation is deteriorating rapidly, but the external pressure is also ramping up dramatically. We're hearing threats that go far beyond sanctions or conventional military maneuvers.
Way beyond.
We're talking about threats that directly challenge the legitimacy of the entire leadership structure.
Absolutely. The level of external rhetoric has reached open assassination threats against the supreme leader himself. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham stated publicly on Fox News that if the Iranian regime continues killing protesters, Donald Trump would authorize the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei.
That's not a vague threat, that's a direct threat to the supreme leader. The highest authority in the country aired openly on television.
It essentially removes any concept of diplomatic immunity for the regime's top leader.
How is the regime prepared to handle this kind of threat, especially given the continuous strategic losses of their top commanders?
The core leadership structure has been severely weakened due to systematic elimination by external forces, specifically Israel. Israeli assassinations have strategically targeted and eliminated highly experienced members of the Revolutionary Guard and the Council of the Revolution over the last few years.
So the people who replace them are less experienced.
They may lack the necessary experience, command ability, and revolutionary legitimacy of the veterans they replaced.
You're describing a hollowing out of the military command structure. When you lose that institutional knowledge, the ability to plan complex counterinsurgency operations or external conflicts severely diminishes.
Exactly. The regime is vulnerable at the top. This raises the fundamental question that analysts are debating. Is the current level of internal chaos enough by itself to topple them loose?
And what do the analysts say?
The analysts say no, not yet. They outline 3 critical conditions required for the regime to fall, and these are essential criteria for anyone tracking this crisis to understand.
Okay, lay out the 3 conditions we need to watch for.
First, there must be splits in the military and the IRGC. This is absolutely paramount. Continued protests, the psychological impact of assassinations of high-ranking officers, and the perceived weakness of the current leadership might finally break the unity and loyalty of the security forces.
If the IRGC fractures,
The regime falls instantly.
that means the IRGC leadership would need to choose between its loyalty to the ideology or its loyalty to the nation, or even just its own survival. What's the second condition?
Second, the joining of the poorest class is essential. The most widespread and poorest segments of society must join the movement. They are the majority of the population.
They provide the numbers.
The sheer weight of numbers needed to overwhelm the security forces. This will only happen if the revolution demonstrates prolonged resilience and survival against the regime's inevitable crackdown, giving the poor confidence that the movement might succeed.
So they are waiting to see who wins before they commit their lives to the cause. And the third condition?
Total economic paralysis. Sustained protests must completely cripple the economy, rendering the government unable to fund essential operations or maintain social support networks, like food subsidies or fuel supply,
If the government can't pay its soldiers,
or provide these basic subsidized goods to the poorer classes, that is the death knell. The lack of funds breaks Condition 1 and enables Condition 2.
those conditions are high bars. But if the regime feels their back is against the wall, if they see the IRGC wavering and the economy seizing up, what is their classic countermove to divert internal attention?
Their standard desperate strategy to relieve overwhelming domestic pressure is external conflict. The head of Iran's National Security Committee already threatened a firm response to foreign interference, which is code for lashing out.
So what exactly would that move be?
A preemptive strike on Israel, or a massive coordinated attack through proxies like Hezbollah. This move would instantly achieve several domestic goals.
Right, it changes the narrative.
It would change the national narrative from "we are failing economically" to "we are under existential attack from the Zionist enemy." It would rally domestic national support against a common external enemy, and crucially, it would provide essential political cover to brutally suppress the internal revolution without facing immediate, massive international condemnation.
It's a classic dangerous maneuver of desperation.
Very dangerous.
Let's connect this back to the beginning. We need to look at the broader implications, especially how Iran's current crisis and potential collapse ties directly into the silent geopolitical coup we saw in Venezuela earlier.
The fall of Venezuela was an absolute disaster for the Iranian regime, both strategically and financially. Sources suggest Iran allegedly holds up to $170 billion in assets tied up there.
170 billion.
Not necessarily cash, but strategic investments, long-term oil deals, infrastructure control, loans, all of which are now completely inaccessible and likely forfeit due to the U.S. political pivot.
That's a crippling economic blow, especially for a regime struggling with currency collapse and trying to finance its security apparatus. It's also a massive strategic loss of operational space in the Western Hemisphere.
And crucially, the lack of response from their purported allies sent a chilling signal. Neither Russia nor China intervened, not militarily, not strongly diplomatically, to save Venezuela from the U.S.'s economic and political arm twisting.
So that sends a clear message to Iran.
Crystal clear. When the chips are down, they might not intervene to save the mullahs either. Iran now sees itself fighting entirely alone on the global stage, with no reliable external security guarantee.
And the pressure on oil prices we mentioned earlier, which is being caused by Venezuelan oil hitting the external market, even if it's controlled by the U.S., compounds Iran's extreme economic weakness.
Exactly. This is the quiet, brilliant, and devastating economic warfare being waged by the U.S.-aligned powers. OPEC plus cruise, which includes U.S.-aligned nations like Saudi Arabia, is deliberately flooding the global market with oil, keeping prices low.
They're driving the price down on purpose.
Sources indicate Brent crude needs to stay around $60 a barrel, or potentially drop further to $50 or $49 to achieve maximum pain.
Why is that price point $50 to $60 a barrel so critical for Iran's survival?
Iran is heavily sanctioned, meaning to sell oil at all, they have to offer massive discounts to buyers, often $10 to $15 below the Brent crude price, to make the buyers willing to risk U.S. sanctions. Analysts estimate that given their internal costs for extraction, refining, and transportation, coupled with the need to finance the IRGC and external militias like Hezbollah, the Iranian regime needs oil prices to be consistently in the high 70s to low 80s just to break even and fund their operations.
So if non-sanctioned oil is cheap and plentiful in the $60 range, why would major buyers in Asia risk sanctions by buying heavily discounted but riskier Iranian oil?
They wouldn't. Low prices make it less desirable to take that risk. This cripples Iran's revenue stream and makes it exponentially harder for the regime to finance its survival.
So OPEC is basically conducting economic warfare from the outside.
They're playing a critical, quiet role in weakening Iran, essentially bringing about that third condition for collapse economic paralysis from the outside.
So let's consider the truly terrifying post-collapse scenario, regardless of whether Iran falls due to a massive internal revolt or a preemptive strike that goes wrong. What does the region look like?
If the regime is replaced by a system approved by the U.S. and Israel, a system of their liking, which favors a secular Western-aligned Iran, it could create a catastrophic regional dynamic. The sources paint this potential outcome clearly, a complete reversal of regional alignments.
A new pro-U.S. Israel-Iran. I mean, that would mean a former revolutionary adversary suddenly becomes a strategic partner.
Precisely. This new, powerful Iran could join an active anti-Arab alignment, cooperating directly with the U.S. and Israel against Arab nations, specifically those nations that have historically viewed Iran as a rival, but have been resistant to a full U.S.-Israel alliance. It reverses decades of geopolitical structure overnight.
And the implication is that the U.S. would then command two major geopolitical pivots, Venezuela in the West and this new Iran in the Middle East.
Which would allow them to control global oil reserves, strategic trade routes, and military footholds simultaneously with unprecedented power. It would transform regional power into global hegemony instantly.
Achieved through economic warfare and political pressure rather than a massive conventional war.
And the only ones who lose are the current Russian-Chinese axis and any neutral Arab state that now finds itself flanked by U.S. power.
So as we wrap things up, we've tracked a truly complex and fast-moving global dance. We've seen aggressive U.S. posture globally, what we call the heavy stick approach, backed by a massive proposed $1.5 trillion defense budget.
And an industrial overhaul.
And simultaneously, we've analyzed the catastrophic internal instability in Iran, fueled by economic warfare like the OPEC strategy and the fallout from the Venezuela pivot.
It's a full-spectrum campaign.
We're witnessing a complete rewriting of the geopolitical script, often without conventional war, but through highly effective economic and political maneuvers, like the weaponization of maritime enforcement and targeted financial strangulation.
The crucial lesson for the learner here is synthesis. Recognize that seemingly isolated events, a tanker seizure near Iceland, massive economic protests in Tehran driven by the collapse of the rial, and a quiet forced oil deal in Caracas, are all deeply connected.
They're all part of the same story.
They are driven by a singular, focused race for resources and global dominance in a geopolitical system that is rapidly collapsing and seeking to establish a new, possibly more aggressive, American-led order.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Will the next major geopolitical shockwave, the one that truly defines the next decade, come from a traditional military conflict involving this new dream army? Or will it come from the cascading effect of economic collapse in strategically critical nations like Iran, forcing the hand of regional and global powers into a conflict they desperately wanted to avoid?
It's a profound question to mull over this week.
It really is. Is the next era of global conflict starting on the battlefield or in the bank ledger?
A very good question.
And on that note, stay curious, keep those questions coming, and remember to subscribe to the Deep Research Podcast so you never miss another deep dive.
Until next time, keep analyzing.